The nursing home staff doubted when they saw the poor boy trying to help the rich patient with Alzheimer's. When the elderly man's executive daughter appeared at his door, everyone was shocked. Jordan's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor of Boston Pines nursing home. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he made his way down the familiar corridor, his backpack heavy with today's failed math test. A group of nurses at their station watched him pass, their whispers following him like shadows. "That's the cleaning lady's boy," one muttered, not quite under a breath. "Should we really let him wander around unsupervised?" Another responded. Jordan kept walking, his shoulders tight. He'd been coming here every day after school for the past 8 months, but some staff members still looked at him like he might steal something. The 11-year-old pushed the thoughts away and focused on the reason he was here, the same reason he'd started volunteering in the first place. The memory of his father's funeral hit him suddenly. The cold March rain, his mother's tight grip on his hand, the way his grandmother had collapsed beside the casket. 2 years later, his grandmother followed, eaten away by grief until there was nothing left but an empty shell in a hospital bed. Jordan had read to her every day until the end. "Jordan," Ms. Peterson, the volunteer coordinator, called out from her office. "Could you come here for a moment?" He backtracked to her door, noting the worry lines around her eyes. Ms. Peterson was one of the few staff members who treated him like a person instead of a problem. "How are you doing today?" she asked, gesturing for him to sit. "I'm okay," Jordan replied, settling into the chair. "Just finished my rounds with Mrs. Rodriguez. She wanted to show me her new photos of her grandkids again." Ms. Peterson nodded, then leaned forward. "Jordan, I have a special request. We have a patient, Mr. Thompson, who's been having some difficulties lately. He has Alzheimer's, and it's getting worse. His family brought in some old photo albums, hoping they might help, but—" She paused. "He gets very agitated when the nurses try to help him with them." Jordan's stomach tightened. He'd seen some of the Alzheimer's patients during their bad moments. The screaming, the confusion, the fear in their eyes. "I've noticed how patient you are with our residents," Ms. Peterson continued. "How you take time to really listen. Would you be willing to try spending some time with Mr. Thompson? Just sitting with him, maybe helping him look through his photos?" Before Jordan could answer, a crash echoed from down the hall, followed by shouting. They both jumped up and rushed toward the noise. In room 237, they found an elderly white man in a blue sweater, photos scattered across the floor around him. Tears streamed down his weathered face as he clutched an album to his chest. "Who are these people?" he demanded, his voice breaking. "They say they're my family, but I don't know them. I don't know any of them." The nurses tried to approach, but he waved them away. Jordan stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. The man's distress felt familiar. He'd seen that same lost look in his grandmother's eyes near the end. "That's Mr. Thompson," Ms. Peterson whispered. Jordan watched as the old man's fingers trembled over a black and white photograph. Something twisted in his chest. The same feeling he'd had watching his grandmother slip away, one memory at a time. "I'll do it," Jordan said quietly. "I'll help him." Ms. Peterson touched his shoulder. "Are you sure? He can be difficult." Jordan nodded, already moving into the room. He knelt down and started gathering the scattered photos, careful not to bend them. Mr. Thompson watched him warily. "Hi, Mr. Thompson," Jordan said, keeping his voice steady. "I'm Jordan. Would you like some help picking these up?" The old man stared at him for a long moment. "These were my parents," he said, holding up a photo with shaking hands. "At least, they tell me they were. But I can't remember their faces anymore." Jordan took a deep breath and sat cross-legged on the floor, leaving space between them. "Maybe we could look at them together? Sometimes it helps to have another pair of eyes." Mr. Thompson's grip on the album loosened slightly. "You're just a boy," he said, but there was less suspicion in his voice now. "Yes, sir," Jordan replied. "But I'm a good listener." From the doorway, Ms. Peterson watched as Mr. Thompson slowly lowered himself to sit in his chair, still clutching the album. Jordan remained on the floor, patient, unthreatening. After what seemed like hours, Mr. Thompson opened the album. "This one," he said, pointing to a faded photograph. "They say this was my wedding day, but it's just blank. All blank." Jordan leaned forward slightly. "That's a beautiful church in the background," he offered. And look at all those flowers. Mr. Thompson's fingers traced the edge of the photo. Yes, there are flowers. White ones. As the afternoon light faded outside the window, Jordan stayed, listening to Mr. Thompson's fragments of memories, watching him struggle to piece together the faces of his past. He thought about his mother, working her second shift at the diner, about his failed math test, about all the hours ahead trying to help this man remember who he was. But when Mr. Thompson looked up at him with a glimmer of hope in his clouded eyes, Jordan knew he'd made the right choice. This was why he'd started coming here in the first place, because everyone deserved to have someone who would sit with them in their darkest moments, just like he'd done for his grandmother. "Same time tomorrow, Mr. Thompson?" Jordan asked as he stood to leave. The old man clutched the album closer. "You'll come back?" "Yes, sir. We can look at more photos together." As Jordan walked home in the growing darkness, his backpack still heavy with that failed test, he felt something else too, a different kind of weight, a responsibility he'd chosen to carry. Tomorrow would be harder than today. The day after that might be even worse. But he'd be back, because sometimes the hardest choices were also the most important ones. His mother would be home late again, and he'd have to heat up leftover rice and beans for dinner. He'd have to figure out how to study more for math while still keeping his promise to Mr. Thompson. But for now, he just walked, his sneakers hitting the pavement in a steady rhythm, carrying him forward into whatever came next. Jordan returned to room 237 the next day, carrying his backpack and a notebook he'd bought at the dollar store. Mr. Thompson sat in his usual chair by the window, the photo album open on his lap. "Who are you?" Mr. Thompson demanded, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing in my office?" Jordan's heart sank. Miss Peterson had warned him this might happen, but it still hurt. "I'm Jordan, sir. We looked at your photos together yesterday." "Photos?" Mr. Thompson clutched the album tighter. "These are private documents. Confidential. You shouldn't be here." "It's okay, Mr. Thompson," Jordan said, staying near the door. "I can leave if you want." The old man blinked, confusion crossing his face. "Wait, you're that boy, the one who knew about the flowers." "Yes, sir. The white flowers in your wedding photo." Mr. Thompson's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Sit down, then. But don't touch anything on my desk." Jordan pulled up a chair, careful to move slowly. The room wasn't an office. It was a standard nursing home room with beige walls and medical equipment tucked in corners. But he didn't correct Mr. Thompson. "I thought we could try organizing some of your photos today," Jordan said, opening his notebook. "Maybe write down what we know about each one." "Organizing?" Mr. Thompson frowned. "These are already organized. My secretary filed them all properly." Jordan glanced at the album. Photos were stuck in at random angles, some upside down, others crammed 3 to a page. Many had fallen loose, their corners bent. "Maybe we could just look at them together," Jordan suggested. "You could tell me about the people in them." Mr. Thompson turned a page and stopped. That's my father." "No, wait." He squinted. "Maybe my uncle." "Why can't I remember?" Tears welled up in the old man's eyes. Jordan wanted to reach out, to pat his hand like he used to do with his grandmother. But he remembered Ms. Peterson's warning about touching patients without permission. "Tell me what you see in the picture," Jordan prompted. "Not who they are, just what you see." "A man in a uniform. Military, I think, standing in front of a building. No, a ship." "Yes, the ship," Jordan wrote in his notebook. "Military uniform, ship, possibly 1940s?" They spent the next hour like this, with Mr. Thompson describing details and Jordan taking notes. Sometimes Mr. Thompson would grab a photo and insist it was from his law office. Jordan learned he'd been a lawyer, only to switch mid-sentence and claim it was from his childhood home. "This is useless," Mr. Thompson suddenly shouted, slamming the album shut. "They're all strangers. Every single one of them." "Mr. Thompson, what's wrong?" A nurse appeared in the doorway, shooting Jordan a suspicious look. "Get this boy out of here. He's trying to confuse me." Jordan gathered his things quickly, his hands shaking. In the hallway, he pressed his back against the wall and took deep breaths, just like his mother had taught him. "Don't take it personally," the nurse said, her voice softer now. "He has good days and bad days." "I know." Jordan thought about his grandmother's bad days, when she'd screamed that strangers were trying to poison her. "I'll come back tomorrow." But the next day wasn't better. Or the day after that. Jordan tried different approaches, organizing photos by size, by color, by whether they were indoors or outdoors. Nothing worked. Mr. Thompson's moments of clarity became rarer, and his outbursts more frequent. One particularly bad afternoon, Jordan found him throwing photos onto the floor. "They're lies," Mr. Thompson shouted. "All of them. People keep telling me these are my memories, but I don't remember any of it." Jordan dropped to his knees, carefully picking up the scattered photos. One caught his eye, a streetscape with an old movie theater. "So look at this one." Jordan held it up. "Do you recognize that theater?" Mr. Thompson paused his rampage. "The Paramount," he whispered. I used to go there every Saturday." Jordan grabbed his notebook. "What did you see there?" "Westerns. John Wayne. And—" Mr. Thompson's face scrunched up. "There was a candy shop next door. The owner always gave us extra gummy bears." For a moment, the confusion cleared from Mr. Thompson's eyes. But then it returned, darker than before. "You're trying to trick me," he growled, "planting false memories in my head. Get out." Jordan retreated to the library after that incident. He spent hours researching the Paramount Theater, discovering it had been a Boston landmark from the 1930s through the 1960s. He made a timeline in his notebook, marking when popular Western movies had been released. But his schoolwork suffered. The math test he'd failed wasn't his last. His mother found his latest report card hidden in his sock drawer. "Jordan," she said that night, her voice tight with exhaustion after her double shift. "What's going on? These grades aren't like you." "I'm trying, Mom. It's just—" "Mr. Thompson needs help." "Baby, that's not your responsibility. Those people at the nursing home get paid to help him. You need to focus on school." "But Mom, I'm making progress." Today he remembered the theater, and Jordan. His mother knelt in front of him. "I know you miss Grandma. I know you want to help. But if these grades don't improve, you can't keep volunteering. That's not fair. Mr. Thompson needs me. You need to graduate high school. You need to go to college. That's what your father would have wanted." Jordan stormed to their shared bedroom, slamming the door. He pulled out his notebook, flipping through pages of fragments. Mr. Thompson's disconnected memories, historical facts about Boston, notes about Alzheimer's he'd found in library books. The next day, he tried a new approach. He spread the photos across Mr. Thompson's bed in rough chronological order, based on clues like car models and clothing styles. "Now, sir, look at this one from the Paramount," Jordan said. "That's from the 1950s. And here's another from the same street, but earlier. See how the cars are different?" Mr. Thompson stared at the photos. I can't." "It's okay," Jordan assured him. "We don't have to know everything. We can just look at what's there." "But they're all jumbled." Mr. Thompson's voice cracked. "Like a puzzle where none of the pieces fit." Jordan thought about his mother's words, about his failing grades, about how much time he was spending here instead of studying. But then he remembered his grandmother's face the last time she'd recognized him, how she'd squeezed his hand and said his name. "We'll figure it out," Jordan promised. One piece at a time, he stayed until visiting hours ended, listening to Mr. Thompson's fragments of memories, writing everything down. Tomorrow, he'd have to face his mother, his teachers, his own mounting schoolwork. But for now, he sat with this man who was lost in time, trying to help him find his way back to himself, one faded photograph at a time. Jordan stared at the big red F on his science test. His third failed test this month. Next to it, his teacher had written, "See me after class." When the bell rang, he approached Mrs. Martinez's desk with heavy feet. "Jordan," she said, "what's happening? You used to be one of my best students." "I've just been busy," he mumbled. "At that nursing home?" She shuffled through some papers. "Your mother mentioned it during conference night. She's worried." Jordan shifted his backpack. "I need to go. I'm already late." Jordan dashed, but he was already out the door, speed walking through the crowded hallway. He couldn't be late today. Mr. Thompson had started remembering more about the Paramount Theater, and Jordan had spent all night researching old movie schedules from the 1950s. The familiar antiseptic smell hit him as he pushed through the nursing home's front doors. He rushed past the nurse's station, but Ms. Peterson stepped out of her office. "Jordan, wait." Her face was tight. "We need to talk. I'm already late for Mr. Thompson. That's what we need to discuss." She ushered him in her office and closed the door. "There was an incident this morning." Jordan's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "Mr. Thompson had one of his episodes. He became physically aggressive with one of the nurses, accused her of stealing his memories. But he was doing better. Yesterday, he remembered the candy shop owner's name Jordan. Ms. Peterson leaned forward. Some of the staff have expressed concerns about you spending so much time alone with him. He's becoming more unpredictable. They just don't like me being here, Jordan blurted out. They never have. Ms. Peterson's expression softened. That's not true. I hear them talking. They think because I'm... He stopped, his throat tight. Because you're what? Nothing. Jordan stood up. Mr. Thompson's waiting. Jordan, please sit down. We're not finished. But he was already opening the door. He heard Ms. Peterson calling after him as he strode down the hall to room 237. Mr. Thompson sat in his usual chair, but something was wrong. The photo album lay torn on the floor, pages scattered everywhere. Mr. Thompson? Jordan stepped carefully into the room. It's me, Jordan. The old man's head snapped up. His eyes were wild. You're the one who's been messing with my memories. No, sir. I'm trying to help Help. Help. Mr. Thompson struggled to his feet. You're planting false memories in my head, making me think I knew these people. He grabbed a handful of photos and threw them at Jordan. These aren't my parents. This isn't my wife. These are fake photos you brought to confuse me. Sir, please. Jordan backed toward the door. Security, Mr. Thompson shouted. This boy is trying to steal my memories. Two nurses rushed in. One of them, a woman Jordan had seen whispering about him before, grabbed his arm. What did you do to upset him? She demanded. Nothing. I just walked in. Get him out of here, she told the other nurse. And call Ms. Peterson. Jordan found himself in the hallway, shaking. Through the open door, he could hear Mr. Thompson still shouting about theft and conspiracy. Ms. Peterson arrived, slightly out of breath. Jordan, go wait in my office. But now. He sat in her office for what felt like hours, listening to the muffled chaos down the hall. Finally, Ms. Peterson returned. They had to sedate him, she said quietly. Jordan's eyes burned. Is he okay? He will be. But Jordan, she sat heavily in her chair. I've been doing some research into these photos you've been showing him. She pulled out a familiar picture, the one of the Paramount Theater. Do you know what year this was taken? Jordan nodded. 1952. That's when they were showing those John Wayne movies, Mr. Thompson remembered. And do you know what else was happening at the Paramount in 1952? Jordan shook his head. It was segregated, Jordan. Blacks had to use a separate entrance. Sit in the balcony, only... The words hit him like a punch. He thought about all the happy memories Mr. Thompson had shared about that theater. There are other photos, too, Ms. Peterson continued gently. From times and places that, well, they might bring up memories that are better left forgotten. So what am I supposed to do? Just let him forget everything. Some memories are complicated, Jordan. And in Mr. Thompson's condition, my grandmother had Alzheimer's too, Jordan cut in. She forgot everything at the end. Everything except the bad stuff. The scary stuff. His voice cracked. I don't want that to happen to him. Ms. Peterson was quiet for a moment. I know you want to help, but after today's incident, the administration is considering ending the youth volunteer program entirely. They're worried about liability. They can't do that. They can. And Jordan, your mother called earlier. She's concerned about your grades. Jordan slumped in his chair. She doesn't understand. She understands that you're failing classes, that you're spending hours here instead of studying. Ms. Peterson leaned forward. Maybe it's time to take a break. No. Jordan stood up. I'm not giving up on him. This isn't your decision anymore. The administration doesn't care about Mr. Thompson. They just see him as a problem to manage. Like they see me as a problem. That's not fair, Jordan. Isn't it? He grabbed his backpack. Tomorrow's Saturday. I'll be here at 9. Jordan, you can't. But he was already walking out, his heart pounding. In the hallway, he passed room 237. Mr. Thompson lay sleeping, sedated, the torn photos still scattered across the floor. One photo had drifted into the hallway. Jordan picked it up. It showed the Paramount Theater again, but from a different angle. He could see the separate entrance now, the colored-only sign barely visible in the background. He slipped the photo into his pocket and walked home in the gathering darkness. His mother would be working late again. She'd probably already heard about today's incident, about his latest failed test. Tomorrow would be harder than today. The administration would try to stop him. The nurses would watch him even more closely. His mother might ground him, take away his volunteer privileges completely. But he'd find a way back to room 237. Because somewhere in those scattered photos, beneath the pain and prejudice of the past, were pieces of Mr. Thompson's life worth saving. And Jordan was the only one still looking for them. 9 o'clock Saturday morning found Jordan sitting cross-legged on the floor of the public library, surrounded by books about Boston's history. He'd been there since the doors opened at 8, fueled by a hastily eaten Pop-Tart and determination. "Can I help you find something?" the librarian asked, peering down at him. "I need information about Boston in the 1950s, Jordan said, not looking up from his notebook. "Especially around the Paramount Theater area." The librarian, her name tag read Mrs. Collins, knelt down beside him. "That's quite specific. School project? Something like that?" She studied the books spread around him, local history, architecture guides, even old newspaper microfilm printouts. "You seem very serious about this research." Jordan finally looked up. "I'm helping someone remember." Something in his voice must have touched her, because she stood up and said, "Wait here." She returned with a stack of old Life magazines and local papers from the archives. "These aren't usually available to check out, but I'll make an exception." Jordan spent the next 3 hours creating a timeline. He marked important events, theater openings, popular movies, local business changes, even weather patterns. Anything that might trigger a memory. At noon, he packed his notes and borrowed materials into his backpack and headed to Boston Pines. The weekend receptionist was new. She didn't know about yesterday's incident or any restrictions on his visiting. "Hi, I'm Jordan, here to see Mr. Thompson." She barely glanced up from her phone, waving him through. Jordan found Mr. Thompson awake and calmer than yesterday, though his eyes were still clouded from the sedatives. "Who's there?" he asked, squinting. "It's Jordan, sir. I brought something to show you." Mr. Thompson frowned. "Jordan? The boy with the photos?" "Yes, sir. But today we're going to try something different." Jordan pulled out his notebook and the magazines. He'd spent hours organizing his research into clear, simple points. No dates or complex details, just familiar landmarks and everyday life. "Sir, do you remember downtown Boston? The shops, the streets?" Mr. Thompson's expression remained wary, but he nodded slowly. "Tell me about walking down Washington Street. What would you see?" "Shops," Mr. Thompson said quietly. "Woolworth's on the corner. And—" he paused, his forehead wrinkling. "Music. From somewhere." Jordan flipped through his notes. "Was it from the record store? Next to the shoe repair?" Mr. Thompson's eyes widened slightly. "Yes. They always had speakers outside. Played Frank Sinatra." Jordan wrote this down, then pulled out a magazine showing an old Woolworth storefront. "Like this one? That's it. We get ice cream sodas there after—" Mr. Thompson trailed off, the memory slipping away. "After the movies?" Jordan prompted gently. "At the Paramount?" Instead of getting agitated like yesterday, Mr. Thompson studied the magazine photo. The counter was so shiny. All chrome and red stools. They spent the next hour like this, Jordan showing photos from the magazines, letting Mr. Thompson lead the conversations. When the old man started getting tired or frustrated, Jordan would switch topics. A soft knock interrupted them. It was Marcus, one of the few nurses who'd always been kind to Jordan. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, eyeing the magazine spread. "We're exploring Old Boston," Jordan explained. "Mr. Thompson was just telling me about Woolworth's." Marcus stepped closer, interested. "My grandmother used to talk about that place. Said they had the best cherry cokes in town." "Cherry cokes?" Mr. Thompson sat up straighter. "Yes, with extra syrup. My wife always—" He stopped, his face falling. "I had a wife." "You did, sir," Jordan said quickly, pulling out the wedding photo they'd looked at before. "Remember? At the church with the white flowers?" Mr. Thompson stared at the photo, then at the magazine showing Woolworth's. "She liked cherry cokes," he whispered. "Extra syrup. Every Saturday, after the movies." Marcus watched them with growing interest. When he left the room, he gave Jordan a small nod of approval. The next few days fell into a pattern. Jordan would arrive after school, armed with new research and carefully selected photos. He created a system, starting with places, then connecting them to people and events. The brain's like a city, he explained to Ms. Peterson when she checked on them. If you can't find someone's house, you start with the street, then the neighborhood. That's what we're doing with his memories. Some staff members still watched him suspiciously, but others began to notice changes in Mr. Thompson. He was calmer during their sessions, more engaged. He hadn't had another violent episode. Even Jordan's mother noticed a difference when she picked him up one evening. "You seem more organized," she said, looking at his carefully labeled notebooks. "I'm learning to study better," Jordan replied. "The same way I help Mr. Thompson remember breaking things into pieces that connect." His latest math test sat in his backpack. A C+. Not great, but better. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into his new system, Jordan arrived to find Mr. Thompson holding a photo he hadn't seen before. "This was my law office," Mr. Thompson said clearly. "Corner of Washington and Essex. The building's still there." Jordan checked his notes. He documented that intersection, but hadn't known about the law office. "Tell me about it, sir." First floor was a tobacconist. Always smelled like pipe smoke coming up through the vents. My office was on the 3rd floor, facing east. The morning sun would hit my secretary's desk first. He traced the building's outline in the photo. "I was there 23 years. Jordan wrote everything down, his hand shaking with excitement. This was the most detailed, coherent memory yet. "The thing about memories," Marcus said later, helping Jordan pack up his materials, "is that they're not really gone. They're just lost. You're teaching him how to find them again. Sometimes we find things we weren't looking for," Jordan admitted, thinking about the segregated theater, the separate entrances, the painful parts of the past. "That's life, kid. The good memories come with the bad. Can't have one without the other." Jordan nodded, looking back at Mr. Thompson. The old man had fallen asleep in his chair, the law office photo still in his hands. On his face was something Jordan hadn't seen before: peace. That night, updating his timeline, Jordan realized something. He wasn't just helping Mr. Thompson navigate his memories. He was learning to navigate his own life, organizing, connecting, finding patterns in chaos. His mother found him asleep at their small kitchen table, surrounded by notes and library books. "Maybe this volunteering isn't so bad after all," she whispered, covering him with a blanket. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more memories to unlock, more connections to make. But for the first time since starting this journey, Jordan felt like he had a real method, a way to guide both Mr. Thompson and himself through the maze of past and present, one careful step at a time. Jordan sat alone in the library's reference section, staring at a newspaper clipping from 1954. The headline read, "Protests continue at downtown businesses." Below it, a photo showed angry white faces shouting at black customers trying to enter the Paramount Theater's main entrance. His hands trembled as he added the article to his research folder. For weeks, he'd been carefully avoiding certain photos in Mr. Thompson's album, ones that showed segregated spaces, whites-only signs, separate entrances. But today, buried in a stack of old Boston Globe archives, he'd found something he couldn't ignore. A small article from 1955 mentioned Thompson and Associates, Mr. Thompson's law firm, representing business owners fighting against integration. Finding something interesting? Jordan jumped. Mrs. Collins, the librarian, stood behind him. "Just history stuff," he said, trying to cover the article. She glanced at his notes. "Ah, civil rights era Boston. That's a difficult period to research." "I'm helping someone remember things," Jordan explained. "But some memories, maybe they're better forgotten." Mrs. Collins pulled up a chair. I was a little girl in Boston back then. Those weren't easy times. But forgetting them won't make them go away." Jordan opened his folder, showing her the photos he'd been working with. "This man I help, Mr. Thompson, he was a lawyer back then. And I found out that he might have been on the wrong side of history." Jordan nodded. "And now you're helping him remember?" "I don't know if I should anymore." Mrs. Collins was quiet for a moment. "Memory is tricky, Jordan. Sometimes the hardest ones to face are the ones we need to remember most." Jordan thought about that all the way to Boston Pines. At the nurse's station, Marcus stopped him. "Heads up," he said quietly. "Mr. Thompson's having a rough day." Kept talking about some court case. Jordan's stomach tightened. Thanks for the warning. He found Mr. Thompson pacing his room, agitated. Photos were scattered across his bed. You're late, the old man snapped. I have depositions to prepare. Mr. Thompson, it's Jordan. I'm here to look at photos with you. Photos? No. I have to review this case. Simmons versus Downtown Merchants Association. Very important. Jordan froze. That was the integration case he'd just read about. Sir, maybe we should sit down. They're trying to change everything. Mr. Thompson continued pacing. These people demanding special treatment. My clients have rights. Jordan's chest felt tight. He wanted to run, to forget what he'd learned, to go back to simple memories of movie theaters and ice cream sodas. Instead, he took out his notebook. Tell me about the case, Mr. Thompson. The old man stopped pacing. What? The case you're working on. Tell me about it. Mr. Thompson sank into his chair. My clients, they're business owners. Good people. They have a right to serve who they want. And the other side? They're... Mr. Thompson's face clouded. They want to eat at the lunch counters. Send their children to certain schools. His hands started shaking. But there are rules. Order. You can't just change everything overnight. Jordan wrote it all down, his pencil pressing hard against the paper. I'm a good lawyer, Mr. Thompson whispered. I protect people's rights. Whose rights, sir? The old man looked at Jordan, really looked at him, maybe for the first time. Something shifted in his expression. You're that boy. The one who helped me remember. Yes, sir. But you're... He gestured vaguely at Jordan. And I was... Tears welled in Mr. Thompson's eyes. Oh, God. The things we did. The things I did. Jordan sat very still, his notebook open in his lap. There was a case, Mr. Thompson continued, his voice breaking. A family wanted to eat at Woolworth's. Just eat a meal like anyone else. And I argued against them. Used the law to keep them out. He covered his face with his hands. Why are you helping me remember these things? Because they're part of who you are, Jordan said quietly. The good and the bad. How can you sit there, knowing what I did, the same way I sit with anyone who needs help? Mr. Thompson lowered his hands, his face wet with tears. I was wrong. So wrong. But back then it seemed, you thought you were protecting something. Yes. Order, tradition, the way things were supposed to be. He laughed bitterly. What a fool I was. They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Jordan pulled out the photo of the Paramount Theater. Tell me about the separate entrance, he said. Mr. Thompson flinched. No, I can't, please. Tell me what you remember. The old man took the photo with trembling hands. It was around the side. Narrow stairs, poor lighting. We made them wait outside, even in winter. His voice cracked again. There was a little girl once, couldn't have been more than 6, standing in the snow, waiting to see Cinderella. And I walked right past her, into the warm lobby. Didn't even look back. Jordan wrote it all down. Why? Mr. Thompson asked. Why make me remember these terrible things? Because they happened. And forgetting them, that would be another kind of wrong. A knock at the door made them both jump. Miss Peterson stood there, concern on her face. Everything okay in here? Jordan looked at Mr. Thompson, who nodded slowly. We're remembering, Jordan said. All of it. That evening, walking home, Jordan thought about what Mrs. Collins had said about difficult memories. His backpack was heavy with history, not just Mr. Thompson's, but Boston's, America's, his own people's. His mother was waiting up for him, still in her diner uniform. You're late, she said. Sorry, Mr. Thompson. We had a lot to talk about today. She studied his face. Hard things? Yeah. She pulled him into a hug. Sometimes the hardest conversations are the most important ones. Jordan held on to her tightly, thinking about Mr. Thompson's tears, about that little girl in the snow, about all the memories that shaped who they were, the ones worth saving and the ones too painful to forget. Tomorrow, they would continue their work. There would be more difficult memories, more painful truths to face. But tonight, Jordan understood something new about his task. He wasn't just helping Mr. Thompson remember his past. He was helping him understand it, maybe for the first time. The administration meeting was set for 9 a.m. Jordan sat outside the conference room, his notebooks clutched to his chest, listening to the muffled voices inside. Miss Peterson had warned him yesterday. After Mr. Thompson's latest episode, they were considering ending all one-on-one volunteer interactions with patients. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered to Marcus, who'd come to support him. "I'm supposed to be in school." "Some things are more important than perfect attendance," Marcus replied. "Besides, you're the one they need to hear from." Through the door, Jordan heard raised voices. He recognized Dr. Harris, the facility director. "It's a liability issue. We can't have untrained minors working with advanced dementia patients." Another voice. "The boy's done more for Thompson than any of our staff." "That's exactly the problem. He's not staff. He's not trained. He's not insured." Jordan's hands tightened on his notebooks. Inside were months of carefully documented memories, connections, progress, and setbacks, like yesterday's incident. It had started normally enough. Jordan was showing Mr. Thompson photos from his law office when the old man suddenly became agitated. "These are my files," he'd shouted. "Someone's been tampering with evidence." Before Jordan could calm him, Mr. Thompson had tried to leave the room, convinced he needed to get to court. When an orderly blocked his way, he'd become physical. It took 3 staff members to subdue him. The door opened. Miss Peterson stuck her head out. "They're ready for you, Jordan." The conference room fell silent as he entered. 8 adults sat around a long table: administrators, doctors, legal representatives. Dr. Harris sat at the head, frowning at his papers. "Sit down, Jordan," he said without looking up. "We have some questions about your interactions with Mr. Thompson." Jordan sat, keeping his notebooks close. "Yesterday's incident," Dr. Harris continued, "was the 3rd violent episode this month, all during or shortly after your visits. But let me finish. Mr. Thompson's daughter is concerned about his agitation levels. Some staff members have reported your methods might be problematic." "Problematic how?" A woman in a gray suit, the facility's lawyer, spoke up. "You've been encouraging him to recall potentially traumatic memories, particularly regarding racial issues from his past. I'm helping him remember who he is, and who gets to decide what he should remember?" Dr. Harris asked sharply. "You? A child?" Jordan opened one of his notebooks. "May I show you something?" The lawyer started to object, but Ms. Peterson cut in. "Let him speak." Jordan pulled out his timeline, months of documented interactions, progress notes, patterns he'd observed. "When I first started, Mr. Thompson couldn't recognize his own wedding photo. Now he remembers his wife's favorite ice cream flavor. He can describe his law office in detail. Yes, some memories are hard, but they're all part of who he is." "That's not your decision to make," Dr. Harris insisted. "No, it's his. And every time he remembers something difficult, he chooses to face it, to understand it." The lawyer leaned forward. "And yesterday, when he attacked an orderly, he was confused about a court case from 1955. Jordan swallowed hard. "A civil rights case?" The room grew very quiet. "I found articles about it. His firm represented businesses fighting integration. Yesterday, he remembered defending them. And yes, it upset him. But not because I made him remember, because he understood, maybe for the first time, that he'd been wrong." Dr. Harris shuffled his papers. "This is exactly our concern. You're triggering traumatic memories, I'm helping him face them. He needs to remember the good and the bad. Otherwise, the confusion just gets worse." "Jordan," Ms. Peterson said gently, "we understand you want to help. But we have to consider liability, A commotion outside interrupted her. Raised voices, running feet. Then Marcus burst in. "Mr. Thompson's having another episode. A bad one." Jordan was on his feet before anyone could stop him. He ran down the hall to room 237, the administrators following. Mr. Thompson was standing by the window, tears streaming down his face, photos scattered around him. "I have to make it right," he kept saying. "I have to fix it." "Mr. Thompson?" Jordan stepped forward despite Dr. Harris trying to pull him back. The old man turned. "Jordan? Is that you?" "Yes, sir. I'm here. I remembered something terrible." He held up a photo, the Paramount Theater again. "That little girl in the snow. I found out what happened to her." Jordan moved closer. "What happened?" "She died. Pneumonia. Standing in the cold, day after day." His voice broke. "Because of people like me. Because of rules I defended." The administrators watched in silence as Jordan picked up the scattered photos. Sir, do you want to tell me about her? Mr. Thompson sank into his chair. Her name was Ruby. Ruby Williams the first looked up the case later, after everything changed. She was 6 years old. Wanted to see Cinderella. Jordan pulled out his notebook, started writing. What are you doing? Dr. Harris demanded. My job, Jordan replied without looking up. Mr. Thompson, tell me more about Ruby. For the next hour, they sat together. Mr. Thompson talked about the case, about Ruby, about all the things he wished he'd done differently. Jordan wrote it all down while the administrators watched. Finally, Dr. Harris cleared his throat. Jordan, we need to continue our meeting. No, Mr. Thompson said firmly. I need him here. Mr. Thompson, we're concerned about Dash. I remember things with him. Hard things, yes, but they're my memories, my life, my mistakes. He looked at Jordan. He helps me face them, understand them. Ms. Peterson stepped forward. Perhaps we could implement some safety protocols. Additional supervision, Dash. I don't need supervision, Mr. Thompson snapped. He gestured at Jordan's notebooks. I need this. The truth. Even when it hurts. Jordan stood up. I can't stop coming here. Mr. Thompson needs to remember all of it, and I need to help him. Young man, the lawyer began, the liability issues, Dash, are less important than letting a man understand his own life. Marcus cut in from the doorway. Even the parts he's not proud of. Dr. Harris looked around the room, at Jordan's determined face, at Mr. Thompson's tears, at the photos that told a story no one had wanted to remember. We'll need signed waivers, he said finally. And protocols, clear boundaries, and supervision, Ms. Peterson added. Jordan nodded, relief flooding through him. Thank you. That evening, updating his notebooks at home, Jordan thought about Ruby Williams, about choices and consequences, about memories that hurt and healing that comes from facing them. His mother found him still writing at midnight. Baby, you need sleep? Just one more page. Mr. Thompson remembered something important today. She looked at his careful notes, his timelines, his dedication to preserving one man's difficult journey through the past. Your father would be proud, she said softly. You're doing good work. Jordan thought about the administrators, about Ruby, about Mr. Thompson's tears of recognition. Tomorrow would bring more memories, more challenges, more moments of truth. But tonight he wrote it all down, the good, the bad, the painful, the real. Because that's what memory keepers do. They preserve the truth, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Jordan walked into room 237, carrying a new box. After the administrators' meeting, he'd spent weeks refining his system, making it more organized, more purposeful. Each photo was now carefully labeled, cross-referenced with his research notes, and arranged chronologically. Good morning, Mr. Thompson, he said. The old man looked up from his chair by the window. Jordan, I was hoping you'd come early today. That was the first surprise. Mr. Thompson recognized him immediately. The second surprise came when the old man pulled out a folded piece of paper from his sweater pocket. I remembered something last night. Asked Marcus for paper, so I could write it down before I forgot. Jordan sat down, pulling out his notebook. What did you remember? That little girl, Ruby? I did see her again. Years later, after the laws changed, Mr. Thompson's hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. She was in college by then, coming out of the Paramount's main entrance. I recognized her. Did you speak to her? No. Mr. Thompson's voice cracked. I was too ashamed, but I watched her walk out into the sunshine, head held high. No more waiting in the snow. Jordan wrote it down, noting the date, the context, the emotional weight of the memory. Show me what you brought today, Mr. Thompson said, eyeing the box. Jordan opened it carefully. I've been organizing everything by year and location. But today, I thought we could try something different. He pulled out a map of downtown Boston, carefully marked with color dots. Each color represents a different part of your life. Red for legal cases, blue for personal memories, green for places you went regularly. When you remember something, we'll connect the dots. Mr. Thompson leaned forward, interested, like connecting evidence in a case. Exactly. See this red dot? That's your law office. And this blue one? The Paramount. When you remembered Ruby coming out of the theater years later, you connected these two parts of your life. Understanding lit up Mr. Thompson's face. It's all connected? Yes, sir. Every memory links to others. We just have to find the connections. They spent the morning plotting points on the map, drawing lines between locations, building a web of memories. When Mr. Thompson got confused about dates, Jordan showed him how the physical locations could anchor the memories in place. Your office was here, Jordan pointed. So if you remember walking to Woolworth's for lunch, it had to be along this street. Past the tobacconist, Mr. Thompson added. The smell of pipe smoke, right? And that connects to this memory here about your father's pipe collection. Marcus stuck his head in around noon. How's it going? Show him, Mr. Thompson said eagerly. Show him the map. Jordan held it up, explaining the color system, the connections, the way memories flowed from one point to another. That's impressive, Marcus said. Dr. Harris will want to see this. Bring him in, Mr. Thompson insisted. I want to show him myself. That was the third surprise. Mr. Thompson wanting to interact with others, to share his memories instead of hiding from them. Dr. Harris arrived with Ms. Peterson. They stood quietly as Mr. Thompson traced the paths on the map, explaining connections Jordan hadn't even noticed. You see here? This is where I first met my wife. And it connects to this point here, our favorite restaurant. And then here, where we'd walk on Sundays. His recall is remarkable, Dr. Harris murmured to Ms. Peterson. It's not just recall, Jordan explained. The memories support each other now. When he remembers one thing, clearly, it helps unlock others. Like building a house, Mr. Thompson said. Each memory is a brick, and they all hold each other up. Dr. Harris made notes in his folder. We'll want to document this method. It could help other patients. After they left, Mr. Thompson sat back, tired but satisfied. I didn't think I'd ever remember so much again. You just needed a different way to look at it, Jordan said, adding another connection to the map. No, Mr. Thompson touched his arm. I needed someone who wasn't afraid of the hard parts. Someone who could help me face everything, the good and the bad. They worked through the afternoon, adding more points, more connections. When Mr. Thompson got frustrated or confused, Jordan would guide him back to a solid memory. The law office, the Paramount, places that felt real and grounded. It's strange, Mr. Thompson said as the day wound down. I spent years trying to keep things separate. Different doors, different water fountains, different rules for different people. But now I see. Everything's connected. Everyone's connected. Jordan added that to his notes. That's important, sir. Can you tell me more? I remember arguing in court about separate but equal. What a lie that was. Nothing separate can ever be equal. It just breaks things apart, breaks people apart. He touched the map gently. Like these memories. They only make sense when you connect them. As Jordan packed up his materials that evening, Mr. Thompson called him back. I want you to have something. He pulled a photo from his album, the Paramount Theater, but not the segregated entrance shot. This one showed the theater after integration, its single entrance welcoming everyone. To remind you, Mr. Thompson said, that things can change. People can change. Jordan added the photo to his box. Thank you, sir. No, thank you. For helping me remember who I was and recognize who I should have been. Walking home in the dusk, Jordan thought about connections, between memories, between places, between people. His notebooks were full of them now, each one a thread in the complex web of one man's life. His mother was waiting up again. Good day, she asked. Jordan showed her the map, explained the breakthrough. Look at you, she smiled. Teaching an old lawyer new ways to look at evidence. He taught me something too, Jordan said, about how everything connects, how you can't understand one piece without seeing how it fits with all the others. She hugged him tight. Your father would say that's true about people too. That night, Jordan added a new section to his notebooks, not just recording memories, but tracking transformations. How remembering the past could change how you saw the present. How facing difficult truths could open doors to deeper understanding. Tomorrow, they'd add more connections, uncover more memories. But tonight, Jordan knew they'd crossed a threshold. Mr. Thompson wasn't just remembering his life anymore. He was understanding it, maybe for the first time. And in helping him make those connections, Jordan was learning to see his own world differently, not as separate pieces, but as one continuous story where every memory, every person, Every moment connected to all the others in ways that were only now becoming clear. The woman in the expensive suit appeared without warning on a Tuesday afternoon. Jordan was in the middle of mapping out another memory cluster with Mr. Thompson when she walked into room 237. "Daddy?" Mr. Thompson looked up, his eyes suddenly sharp and clear. "Catherine?" Jordan started gathering his materials, but Catherine Thompson held up her hand. "Please stay. I want to see what you've been doing with my father." She pulled up a chair, watching as Jordan continued guiding Mr. Thompson through the memory map. Today they were working on his early law career. "This office here," Mr. Thompson pointed, "that's where I took my first case. Pro bono. A widow losing her house to the bank." "You won that case," Catherine said softly. Yes, I remember. Mrs. Sullivan. She brought us cookies every Christmas after that." Catherine's eyes widened. "Daddy, you haven't mentioned Mrs. Sullivan in years. Jordan helped me find her again." Mr. Thompson patted the map. "He shows me how everything connects." Catherine turned to Jordan. "The nurses told me about your system, but I had to see it myself. How did you come up with this?" Jordan shifted uncomfortably. "It just made sense, like evidence in a trial. Everything links to something else." "Show her the timeline," Mr. Thompson insisted. Jordan opened his notebooks, explaining how he'd researched Boston's history, created chronological markers, found ways to anchor floating memories to solid facts. "And these notes about difficult memories?" Catherine asked, turning a page. "We don't hide from those," Mr. Thompson said firmly. "Jordan taught me that. You can't understand the good without facing the bad." Catherine sat back, studying them both. "The facility called me last month, after that incident. They were concerned about liability." "I remember that day," Mr. Thompson said. "I was upset about Ruby Williams, a little girl who wanted to see Cinderella." Mr. Thompson's voice grew heavy. "I've been telling Jordan about the things I regret. The cases I handled, the people I hurt. Daddy, that was a different time, no?" He sat straighter. "No excuses. Jordan helps me remember, so I can understand. Really understand." Catherine's expression softened. She turned back to Jordan. "How old are you?" 11, ma'am. "And you've developed this entire system yourself?" Jordan nodded. "Show her my progress chart," Mr. Thompson said proudly. Jordan pulled out another notebook, filled with careful documentation. Each day's interactions, moments of clarity, connections made, even setbacks, all meticulously recorded. Catherine read through the pages slowly. "This is remarkable. Better than any medical charts I've seen." "He's good at this," Mr. Thompson said. "Better than the doctors." "Because he listens," Marcus added from the doorway. They hadn't heard him come in. "Really listens." Catherine stood up suddenly. "I need to make some calls. Jordan, would you step outside with me?" In the hallway, Catherine pulled out her phone. "I'm on the board of several medical research foundations. What you're doing here, this method you've developed, it could help a lot of people." Jordan's heart raced. "It's just notes and maps, It's more than that. You found a way to help patients navigate their memories, even the difficult ones. That's extraordinary." She paused. "Tell me, what do you want to do when you grow up?" I haven't really thought about it." "Yes, you have," Marcus interrupted. "Tell her." Jordan took a deep breath. "I want to help people like Mr. Thompson, like my grandmother, people who are losing their memories." Catherine nodded. "That's what I thought. How are your grades?" "Better now. I use the same system to study that I use with Mr. Thompson. C+ in math," Marcus added. "Up from an F." Catherine made another call, speaking rapidly about educational funds and early admission programs. When she hung up, she turned back to Jordan. "How would you like a guaranteed spot at Boston Medical Center's youth medical program? And a full scholarship for college if you maintain your grades?" Jordan's knees went weak. Marcus steadied him. "But why?" "Because what you've done for my father is priceless. You haven't just helped him remember. You've helped him heal." She smiled. "Consider it an investment in the future of memory care." They went back into the room where Mr. Thompson was still studying the memory map. "Daddy," Catherine said, "how would you feel about Jordan helping other patients? Teaching his method to the staff?" Mr. Thompson beamed. "He should. Everyone should learn this way. It makes the memories make sense. Over the next few hours, they worked out the details. Jordan would continue his sessions with Mr. Thompson, but also start documenting his method more formally. Catherine made calls to the facility administration, to educational programs, to her foundation contacts. "We'll need your mother's permission, of course," she said. "For what?" Jordan's mother asked from the doorway. She come straight from her diner shift, still in her uniform. Catherine Thompson explained everything: the scholarship, the youth program, the opportunity to develop Jordan's method. "My son did all this," his mother whispered, looking at the detailed notebooks, the memory maps, the careful documentation. "He did more than that," Mr. Thompson said. "He helped me face my past, understand it, make peace with it." Jordan's mother sank into a chair, tears in her eyes. His father always said he'd do something special. That evening, they had a small celebration in Mr. Thompson's room. Catherine ordered pizza for everyone, staff, nurses, even Dr. Harris came by. "We'll need to set up proper protocols," he said, but he was smiling. "Document everything." "Already done," Jordan said, patting his notebooks. As the sun set, casting long shadows through the window, Mr. Thompson pulled Jordan aside. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Not just for helping me remember, but for helping me understand." "You did the hard part," Jordan replied. "You faced everything, even the painful memories, because you showed me how they all connect. How you can't change the past, but you can learn from it." He squeezed Jordan's hand. "You're going to help a lot of people, son." Jordan looked around the room, at his mother's proud face, at Catherine's determined expression as she made more calls, at Marcus's knowing smile, at all the people who had become part of this unexpected journey. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, documenting his method, keeping up his grades, helping other patients. But tonight, watching Mr. Thompson confidently explain a memory cluster to Dr. Harris, Jordan understood something important about legacies. They weren't just about remembering the past. They were about understanding it, learning from it, and using that knowledge to build a better future, one memory at a time. The Boston Pines Nursing Home Activity Room had never been so full. Staff members, residents, families, and even local media crowded the space, all eyes on the small stage where Jordan stood next to Mr. Thompson. 6 months had passed since Catherine Thompson's visit, and everything had changed. "The Jordan Method," Dr. Harris announced to the crowd, "has revolutionized how we approach memory care at our facility. Today, we officially launch our new memory support program, with Jordan as our lead youth consultant." Jordan shifted uncomfortably in his new dress shirt, a gift from Catherine for the occasion. His mother sat in the front row, beaming, her diner uniform replaced by a simple blue dress. "But first," Dr. Harris continued, "Mr. Thompson would like to say a few words." Jordan helped Mr. Thompson to the podium. The old man's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his notes, but his voice was strong and clear. "6 months ago, I was lost in a fog of confusion. My memories were scattered, broken things that brought only pain and fear." He looked at Jordan. "Then this young man showed me how to put the pieces back together. Not just the easy memories, but all of them, even the ones I was ashamed of." Mr. Thompson pulled out their original memory map, now laminated and marked with hundreds of connections. "He taught me that every memory connects to others, that understanding comes from seeing the whole picture." His voice caught, "including the parts we might wish to forget." In the audience, Catherine wiped away tears as her father continued. "Thanks to Jordan, I've been able to face my past, the good and the bad. I've remembered cases I'm proud of, like Mrs. Sullivan and her house, and cases I'm deeply ashamed of, like little Ruby Williams." The room grew very quiet. But Jordan showed me that hiding from painful memories only makes them stronger. By facing them, by understanding them, we can learn from them. Mr. Thompson straightened his shoulders. "That's why my daughter and I have established the Ruby Williams Memorial Scholarship to help underprivileged youth pursue careers in healthcare." Applause filled the room. Jordan's mother grabbed his hand, squeezing tight. After the ceremony, residents and staff members lined up to share their experiences with Jordan's method. Mrs. Rodriguez, his first regular patient after Mr. Thompson, proudly showed off her own memory map. "I can remember all my grandchildren's names now," she said, pointing to the photos Jordan had helped her organize. "Marcus, recently promoted to head nurse, clapped Jordan on the shoulder. "You've started something big, kid." Even Dr. Harris seemed transformed. "We're already getting calls from other facilities," he told Jordan's mother. "They want to implement the program." But the biggest surprise came when Mr. Thompson's old law firm arrived. The managing partner, a woman named Sarah Chun, presented Jordan with an official document. "We've created a trust," she explained, "to fund the expansion of your memory care program and support your education. Mr. Thompson insisted we name it after you, the Jordan Method Foundation." Jordan stared at the paper. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep helping people," Mr. Thompson said softly. "That's all any of us can do. Help others while learning from our own mistakes." Later, as the crowd thinned, Jordan and Mr. Thompson sat in their usual spots in room 237. The walls were now covered with memory maps, timelines, and photos, each one carefully labeled and connected to others. "I remember the first day you came in," Mr. Thompson said. "I was crying over this album. You thought I was trying to steal your memories." They both laughed, a sound that would have seemed impossible all those months ago. "Instead, you helped me find them." Mr. Thompson opened the album to a new page, recent photos of him with Jordan, working on their memory maps. "And now you'll help others do the same? Are you sure you're ready to share our method with other patients?" "More than ready. It's time for you to help more people understand their stories. All of them, even the difficult parts." Jordan nodded, thinking about his own journey. His grades had improved dramatically once he applied his memory mapping techniques to his studies. The youth medical program at Boston Medical Center had already accepted him for their summer session. And now, the foundation would help expand his method to other facilities. His mother appeared in the doorway, still beautiful in her new dress. "Ready to go, baby? We got that meeting at the school tomorrow about your advanced placement classes." "Just a minute." Jordan turned back to Mr. Thompson. "Same time on Monday?" "I'll be here." Mr. Thompson smiled. With more memories to map. That night, Jordan sat at their small kitchen table, updating his notebooks. His mother watched him work, her eyes proud. "Your father would be amazed," she said. "His little boy, changing how people think about memory care." "I just wanted to help one person," Jordan replied. "Like I couldn't help Grandma. But you did help her." His mother sat down beside him. "Those days you spent reading to her, holding her hand, you helped her feel less alone. And now you're using what you learned to help others." Jordan looked at his notebooks, his maps, his carefully documented methods. Each page represented a piece of someone's life, not just the happy memories, but the painful ones too. The ones that needed to be faced, understood, and learned from. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More patients to help, more memories to map, more connections to uncover. The foundation would need organizing, his method would need refining, and he still had to maintain his grades. But tonight, Jordan understood something important about memory, about healing, about the connections that bind past to present and people to each other. Sometimes the hardest roads led to the most important destinations. Sometimes the most painful memories held the most valuable lessons. And sometimes an 11-year-old boy and an old man with Alzheimer's could teach the world something new about remembering, understanding, and growing. Jordan closed his notebook and looked out the window at the Boston skyline. Somewhere out there, other people were losing their memories, fighting against the fog of confusion and fear. But now, thanks to a chance assignment and a torn photo album, they had a new way forward. The Jordan method wasn't just about remembering anymore. It was about understanding, about connecting, about facing the past to build a better future. And that was just the beginning.